Yeah, man, to be completely honest, I was a piece of shit back then. Like, I always had an ego. I never really said it out loud to my teammates, but obviously I was upset because I overperformed and majority of my teammates underperformed. So we definitely should have won that map, but I thought that at that point, my what I was thinking was eventually just keep doing what you're doing, keep playing your best game. Um, Try and be a good teammate. Don't fucking rage. Like, because back then, like, not only me, but other people, everybody would have their moments back then. Like, everybody was kind of a little bit immature, to be honest. But me, in general, like, I had a fucking massive ego. So I didn't make it any better. But at the end of the day, I said, keep doing what you're doing, keep playing, and eventually you're probably going to get picked up by Renegades.
Okay, this is going to be another In Retrospect, and this episode will be with Rickeh, who is one of Australia's most tenured Counter-Strike players, not only in Global Offensive, but in previous versions of Counter-Strike as well. You probably would recognize him, obviously, from playing on Order at the moment, but he's played on teams like Complexity, Rogue, CLG, when he's been over in North America, and obviously Renegades as well, and then even further back before that on Team Immunity. So he's definitely one of the ANZ pros that is sort of competing from that kind of OG era. Maybe there's a few that are still sort of outlasting you, but you're definitely one of the first that sort of came rolling around. So I think we should go all the way back to the beginning when things sort of first started for you, Rickeh. So this was sort of back in 1.6, or did you come in a little bit even before 1.6?
I did play 1.5 for a very, very brief moment, and what happened was I thought the update to 1.5 was Condition Zero. So I was playing Condition Zero for like a year and a half, missing out on all the 1.6 tournaments, and then I eventually realized. But I was like 13 years old then, so I had a brief stint in 1.6. I think the first actual big event that I attended was in 2008.
So what was like, or how long was sort of this tenure in Counter Strike? Because obviously for you, like you say, you were 13, so I assume you mustn't have had like that much going on. But was there like this Team Immunity roster that you joined in Counter Strike or something like that, or am I sort of mixing up the timelines?
Yeah, I joined Team Immunity in 1.6 for one of the last events that happened before CS:GO came out, and I'm not sure if you remember, but it was the nationals that was held in a church. I think it was like on Burke Street or something like that. But yeah, that was the last one. I actually joined Team Immunity then, and then CS:GO came out, and we went our separate ways. But then that was one of the main teams that I always wanted. One of the main organizations that I always wanted to play for coming into CS:GO also.
Okay, so what was that actual team like that you joined? Who was on that roster?
In the 1.6
Yeah,
version,
yeah.
it was me, Gaza, Yam, Destiny, and Benor.
Okay, so a few pretty recognizable names, at least from the early era of Counter-Strike Global Offensive as well. And what was it about the Team Immunity organization that you liked so much that you sort of wanted to play for them again?
I just saw that the support that they had behind them at that current time, and also the players that they always had throughout 1.6 and CS:GO was always consistently the best team, especially in 1.6 more specifically. Um, it They were always players that I looked up to, and there was always always a team that I wanted to be able to join one day. So those were the main guys in 1.6, in my opinion.
All right. What were your results like in 1.6? I like, normally when I do this kind of an interview, I normally have a little bit more context to add to a lot of these questions. But obviously, I wasn't around back at this time, so I don't know the answer to a lot of these questions before I asked them. So, what were you like as a player within the 1.6 space? Were you, pretty good, or because obviously when you joined in Global Offensive, you were one of the top players. But I imagine it's not necessarily the case for 1.6 until maybe the later years, right?
Yeah, so around 2007 and 8 is when I kind of broke out a little bit, and is when I was around 16 years of age, I would say. I attended my first nationals with my team Aftershock, which was me, Teddy T, Jimmy, Neza, and uh, anyway, it was Aftershock. I apologize if anyway, but yeah. So in 2008, we ended up coming fourth at nationals. Before then, we'd always attend Melbourne lands and a bunch of different LAN events, and throughout maybe 2 years or so, we ended up getting better and better results, and that's where I I sort of broke out individually as a player and got noticed by a couple of bigger teams. And then, yeah, in 2008, we had a really good showing at the Nationals, and I ended up um, uh, transitioning into playing with players like Destiny and Gaza and stuff then.
Were you always an AWPer, like from the start as well?
It's kind of funny because I never um, saw myself as a main AWPer until somebody just said, like, you're just AWPing for the team. And then ever since then, I just kept on to it because apparently, like, it's what I got noticed for, but I didn't realize I was actually doing it at the time.
Hmm.
But yeah, at the end of the day, like, it worked out for me.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I don't have too many more questions sort of surrounding that 1.6 era. One thing I do want to know is that did you ever sort of play Source, or were you one of those guys that was like 1.6 Master Race?
Yeah, I only managed to play one tournament in Source probably about 3 or 4 months before CS:GO came out. So I definitely wanted to transition into it if that was going to be the next competitive game for me. But then soon after that, CS:GO came out and everybody swapped. So I didn't get a chance to really play Source. And by that time, it was a little bit too late anyway. Like the CGS had finished and all that cool stuff. So.
Okay, so you kind of missed out on that era a little bit. Anyway, let's jump forward a little bit to, I think, what most people are here to sort of hear about, which is obviously your career in Global Offensive. That's kind of where you've found a lot of your recognizability or whatever it may be, your fame, I suppose. I don't know if you want to go so far as to say that you're famous within Counter-Strike Global Offensive, but hey, we're trying our best. Either way, we'll start things off here, and I don't want to go too deep into these sort of really, really early tournaments, but these are more for kind of context for the viewers, right? And some of the first like early sort of recorded tournaments from Counter-Strike within the Australian region for Global Offensive were things like CGPL Season 1 and the MSI Beat It kind of qualifiers and stuff like that. So the results that you had when you were playing on a team called Archaic at the time were couple of losses to Vox Seminole. And I want to set that sort of a stage because obviously this is a rivalry that then went on to continue within the Team Immunity lineup. So at the time you were playing on this team with Teddy T, PDG, obviously yourself, JKS and Dosky was like very, very early on in Global Offensive. So do you want to give me your brief thoughts on like this early period of Global Offensive? What were your thoughts of the game and how you sort of saw it going in the future and what have you? Because I know a lot of people really didn't like Global Offensive when it first got released.
Yeah, when it came out, it was definitely a shit show. There was a lot of updates to be had, but that being said, I think everybody was super excited for the new game. They just didn't know where it was going. Like nobody had any idea that, starting from 2013, there would be overseas qualifiers. There would be a lot of support coming in, and we could see the trajectory of the North American and European scene, how that was going. And I think that's why everybody was excited, starting from like 2013 onwards. And like you said, the rivalry was mainly with that team Vox Eminor, where it was Sponge, and help me out here, help me out.
Snyper at the time probably would have
Sniper
been on that team, and I guess Azza as well at the time.
and Azza, that's the lineup. That's they were, as soon as CS:GO came out, like that lineup started destroying everybody, and we were always second to them for quite a long time. I think up to like late 2014, 2015, we were pretty much losing almost every overseas qualifier to them. So that's where it began.
Yeah, and so we'll touch on now where it really sort of began for you. This is where like my first memories of Rickeh and of Counter-Strike in general are from. So I have a bit of a better understanding of the era that we're starting to get into now. And this is the time where you join Team Immunity. So this is, one of the most famous rosters in the Australian Counter-Strike sort of history, I guess. This is the Snyper, Emag, James, Yam, and Rickeh roster that I'm talking about. So somewhere in this period as well, JKS must have moved over to Vox because, again, obviously that Archaic roster sort of ceased to exist, at least in that iteration, once you and JKS departed from that team. But this is obviously, a very, very famous roster from the Counter-Strike Global Offensive era. So how did this roster sort of come about? Who was like the driving figure behind it? Who sort of started it? Who got it together? And what was the whole deal behind that?
So for Team Immunity, I think a Sniper kind of started that whole thing. When Team Immunity came out in CS:GO, they actually had 3 different divisions of teams. They had Immunity Black, Immunity White, and Gold. And the Immunity Black team was the team that had come over from Call of Duty, if I remember correctly. And Immunity White was from the CS Source team. It was Ofnu um, and friends, and the gold team was the 1.6 team, which was me, Gaza, Destiny, Ben, and Yam. But that only lasted like a couple of months, and then after that, Immunity decided to keep me and then just get a whole bunch of new people in because the guys they basically just stopped playing competitively. Like the team wasn't um, there wasn't in turmoil or anything. I think just guys just didn't want to play CS:GO at that point.
Okay, so
So that's
was the point of this roster like to be one of the best teams in ANZ, or did you sort of just come together as, you know, just another team kind of thing?
yeah. Back then, when you join Immunity, they expect nothing less than first place. Especially, well, that's how it was in 1.6, and coming into CS:GO, they always expected us to be able to be minimum top two, but their expectations was to be the best in Australia.
Okay.
And yeah, we didn't get that for a while.
Well, what were your expectations for this roster then? You know, because looking at it on paper, I guess at the time you probably wouldn't think that it would be a team that would inevitably be pretty good compared to Vox. Like, I guess at some point there was an argument to be made that Immunity sort of eclipsed Vox at one point in the history of ANZ CSGO, but where did you think that they would sit? Did you think it was going to be solidly a second place team, or was it going to go maybe further than Vox?
I think that we were always going to be able to take maybe a series off them or win a tournament here and there, but I think like mechanically and experience wise, those players were always going to have the advantage over us until later on when Immunity the Immunity team was Snyper, James, Emag, and we actually ended up going overseas and getting that experience also.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the results that you did have then with this Team Immunity roster. You know, some of the early sort of notable tournaments that you played in were the things like the Cologne 2014 qualifier, which you inevitably went on to come second to Vox in, again, a 0-2 to Vox. Then the Azubu Masters Australia, which, if you remember, was in Sydney at ATP, and a couple of the Fnatic guys came down and like commentated or worked at it, or I don't know what was going on there. But
Yeah,
you,
Devil Walk came down and
yeah.
Zubu Masters. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that. That was a good tournament.
Devil Walk and Khan, I think it was, came.
Yes.
And again, you guys go 0-2 against Vox. So, you know, again, second place. And then, you know, things sort of start to turn around, right, when we hit 2014. So we've pretty much skipped all of... we've skipped all of 2014. When we hit 2015 rather, is where things start to sort of turn around a little bit. So I think the early era of Counter-Strike, you know, in 2014 isn't quite as impactful as what then happened in 2015, because 2015 was a really big year for Team Immunity, right? So let's start off with the Faceit League 2015 Stage 1 Oceania qualifier. Now, this was an international tournament qualifier, and I think the first international tournament that Team Immunity then actually might have gone on to play. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But you beat Vox Eminor 16-14 in the final game in the round robin. And what was really weird about this tournament was there was like no playoff stage or anything like that. It was just a round robin. So you just had to win more games than the other team. So essentially it was like all the other results don't matter because everyone knew that Vox and Immunity were going to beat everyone else. And then Vox wins... if Vox wins the game against Immunity, they go overseas. If Immunity wins, they go overseas. And you inevitably win this game against Vox. So this is like the first time, at least I can remember, or that I could find, where you guys actually got a legitimate result against Vox that you won that then led to something else. So was this like a vindication kind of a moment for the team?
Yeah, that was... I can't say how huge that was for us. Like, it was insane. That was our first overseas tournament. The only time we ever beat Vox before that was at an Australian Nationals, and that was the only time in 2014. So 2015, when the Faceit Stage 1 League started, was when we transitioned into overseas tournaments and actually got a lot of experience. We were absolutely ecstatic. Mind you, it was a shit show when we got there because we got destroyed by pretty much everybody. Starting off, we did manage to beat Liquid in a best of 3 at the Faceit Stage 1 tournament. But yeah, it was insane. Like, we were extremely happy to be there.
All right, well, let's talk first about CGPL Season 3. This was actually before you went over to the Faceit Stage 1 final, so I think it's important because there's a lot of context that comes from this particular event. Now, if you remember, this was the one where you came second place to Streamline at. You know, again at ATP. All these tournaments were at ATP at the time. And what was really interesting about this tournament was that Vox wasn't competing at this one. I can't remember exactly the reason why. They must have been overseas for something or other. or they had just decided for some reason not to play domestic tournaments anymore. Either way, the assumption was that Team Immunity was going to be the team to beat at this tournament, that you guys were going to go through and win pretty comfortably, because it's always been Vox Immunity, Vox Immunity, Vox Immunity up to this point. And if there's no Vox, then Immunity should have a pretty free run. But you go on to the grand final and you lose to Streamline. And I think from memory, it was a reasonably close game. But afterwards, it sort of came out that Yam was leaving to this Renegades roster. So was this sort of the reason for the loss? Or like, what was the reason initially for you guys to lose to Streamline at that time?
I think the thing with Yam was he always wanted to transition into Vox, especially like him and JKS were extremely good friends at the time, and like there was no hard feelings on our part. Like I think eventually we always knew that he was going to be the one going, so we were definitely prepared for that. But yeah, losing to Streamline, it's different now because we have different mentalities. But back then, we kind of brushed it off as like, okay, it was an online tournament. We lost to Streamline. They were currently like the most insane team to verse online there. That was our mentality back then. And honestly, to this day, I still think if it was LAN, like we probably would have beat them. But they definitely deserved it. They played way better than us on the day.
Okay, what about the fact that, you know, going on after this, you did end up picking Ustilo up from Team Streamline, right? This was a team that ended up going on to beat you, and then
we took it. Yeah, you're right.
So you essentially got poached, right? Yamp got poached by Renegades, which has gone on to be like a continual thing, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it. Was that like Immunity was a feeder team for Vox, but then you obviously have to take someone from somewhere else as well. So you took Ustilo here. So Ustilo was the player that went to Faceit League finals. So was he someone that you guys had kind of had your eye on for a little bit, or was it maybe just this tournament where you thought, like, oh shit, you know what? What was the reason why you picked up Ustilo?
So yeah, Ustilo was pretty much the first person that we came to after Yam left, because we knew how consistent he was. He always had really, really good performances online, and he wasn't really proven yet at LAN, but we knew that he was around from 1.6, pretty much the same time that I was. He was around 2007, 2008. So he was always looking to take that next step into a big team, and he just hadn't had gotten a chance to do so yet. He was definitely always a good player. He just wasn't given that chance. So we decided 100% he has to be the next one.
All right. So then you obviously go over to the Faceit Stage 1 finals with Ustilo in your roster. So what's the mentality going into this? Like you say, it's your first international event, so this must be a pretty big deal for you. Did you sort of have a boot camp? I feel like from memory, like my memory is a bit fuzzy about this area, but I seem to remember you guys stayed overseas for quite a while. So was there a boot camp like prior to Faceit, or was that after Faceit, or what was going on there?
Yeah, so what happened was we boot camped in London at the Faceit/Twitch offices at that time, where DDK and Bardolph that was their main office for casting. And then Twitch, it was basically like a duplicate offices. Like on one side you had the Faceit production and all that, and then on the other side was Twitch at the time. So we stayed there for a solid 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of boot camp before anything even started. Thanks to Immunity for like setting all that up as well, and the Faceit guys, obviously. Like, yeah, we had a pretty good boot camp going into it, which we definitely needed.
Yeah, particularly because you had a new player in that roster. So what was the general mentality within the team at the time? Like, were you kind of high spirits? Were you feeling good going into that tournament?
We were high spirits all the way through, even like in the practice games that we had against the European teams. Win or lose, like we were always just having a good time. We had a good team environment and mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It was more so towards the later of so when we were in London boot camping after Faceit, we didn't end up coming home. We stayed and we ended up going to another 2 tournaments overseas when things started going on a downwards trajectory for us internally and also results-wise.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I do want to touch on the results first of the Faceit tournament, which is obviously we start off. You guys played NIP you were in Group A with Chad Fnatic, NIP, and Team Liquid. So immediately you see that and you think, fuck, Immunity's probably in a bit of a tough group here. At the time, Liquid obviously wasn't what they are now, so we'll get to that. But first, you lose to NIP. Okay, fair enough. NIP, one of the best teams in the world probably at the time. 16-5 on Inferno. You lost 16-14 on Dust 2 though, and everyone was, probably pretty happy with that. I feel like 16-14 against a team like NIP, not a bad result, right?
Yeah, no, we were happy with that. The funny thing is, we we versed them again after that, like in order to progress through that tournament specifically. And Get Right came up to them and was like, "Boys, I'm sorry, but we're gonna smash you guys this time." And then we ended up losing to them 16-4 on the next one as well.
Yep.
Yeah, it was rough, man. It was definitely rough.
That said, it was a nice building block going into the Team Liquid game because this was the one that was theoretically a bit more winnable for you guys. And it turns out to have been winnable as well. And so these are the results, right? You lose 16-8 on Inferno. So Team Liquid picks up the first map. And then you win 16-13, 16-14 on Mirage. So a very, very close series in the end. But I can remember, like, obviously, me being back here in Australia, watching these games and seeing sort of the community response to these. Like, this was a big fucking deal to see an Australian team going overseas that wasn't called Vox Eminor, being able to have some kind of a result against an international opposition and being able to beat them. Like, I don't know if you remember, but there was like all these memes about NACS is dead, like light a candle for NACS and that kind of thing. There was like the immunity logo, and then there was a candle and it had like Team Liquid. And I think you must have gone on to beat like Cloud9 or something later on in another tournament, because then there was like a Cloud9 one there as well. So what did you think about this? Like, what did you think about the result first? And then what did you think about the community response and how that all sort of went down?
I think if we didn't get at least one win at that first tournament, I think things might have been a little bit different going into like Dreamhack Tours and Gfinity as well. But because we got that, like we had the community behind us, especially the Australian community, and everybody was really excited to see actually how much we can improve throughout the time that we're there, because that was basically only the beginning for us. So we were always confident coming into any match, but yeah, like I said, we 100% needed that win to boost our confidence and mentality at the same time.
Big confidence booster, I'm sure. But you obviously go on, as you say, to face NIP again. They kind of wreck you this time, 16-3, 16-4 on Dust 2 and Mirage. So then you're out of the tournament. So you're donezo for Faceit League. Overall, though, it still seems like community sentiment is pretty happy. And I think you guys are sort of riding on a bit of a high after beating Team Liquid. So you've also sort of mentioned these next couple of events that you were going to go into. Now, the first of those was the Dreamhack BYOC. So my first question with this one is how did you actually BYOC, because you were over in another country where you didn't have your own computer?
Yeah, so this is where the shit show started. It was one of those tournaments where I remember Vox Eminor saying something similar, where they had a BYOC like that and they were playing on laptops, 75 hertz monitors, and there's club music going on in the background and you can't hear shit. It wasn't that bad for us. There was no music in the background. Everything else was pretty much like that. We ended up losing to a team that I don't think that we should have lost to, but we kind of underestimated them. At that time, they were called B Genius or something like that. And yeah, like you lose one map and you're out basically. So we were extremely upset about that. I think we took it to heart a little bit too much, and that's when we started like dabbling a little bit too deep into what our issues were, not internally, but like in game. And I think we focused a lot, and this is probably going to come up a little bit, but we focused a lot more on the negatives than the positives, which is what led us to a little bit of a downfall towards the end of that trip. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that was obviously something that seemed to transcend across the entire history of the Team Immunity roster, you know, particularly toward the end when things sort of started to really break down. It seemed like there was a lot of negativity coming out of the team. But either way, we'll definitely get to that, because I think that's one of the more interesting parts of your career, at least to someone like me who's been around since that time. Let's jump forward to the Gfinity Spring Masters. Now, this was the final event that you guys played overseas before coming back to Australia. Obviously, you didn't have a great time in the BYOC, but okay, it's not that big of a deal tournament, right? Faceit and Gfinity, I felt like were the two more important tournaments that you attended when you were overseas. But you do go to this Gfinity Spring Masters tournament, and you kind of got wrecked in the group. From memory, I don't remember if you picked up even a map.
We didn't win a game.
Yeah.
We ended up going overtime against Titan on Mirage, and we lost 17-19 to overtime. Every single other game was, I don't think we got anything better than 16-9.
Right. I actually remember watching this event now that you mentioned that Titan game, because I think you guys were playing against Titan at the exact same time that Vox was playing against someone else. It was either like NIP or Fnatic or something.
Yeah, and they ended up beating Fnatic 16-13 on Train, from what I remember.
Yeah, so that was the thing. Like, there was this massive discrepancy between you guys not having a great tournament, and then this was the tournament, I think, where Vox really had a very, very good tournament, at least. Yeah. Like, at the time, it was very, very good. Like, you look at them now, it's like they got knocked out in groups. They didn't really do anything. But for the Australian fans at the time, to see Vox being able to get a map off of Fnatic and being able to get a map off of NIP in the same tournament, massive, massive deal. And I think also JKS was going kind of bananas at this event. Either way, that was like a discrepancy that a lot of people were sort of discussing at the time. I remember being in like a viewing party and people were talking about like, oh, I'm watching the good Australian team, beat Fnatic, and then I'm watching the shit Australian team beat lose to Titan. So like, did you kind of almost start to feel like maybe there was a bit of community sentiment starting to go against you guys, or was that not even part of like the psyche at the time?
We were pissed, man. I think the mentality back then was definitely a little bit different. Like, our main focus coming into Gfinity was to do better than Vox, you know? And as soon as that didn't happen, it was just downhill. And obviously it shows that if you think that way, it's not going to work out. Like, and even if you think that way and it does work out, it's not the right way to think. I don't think so. It's just, they ended up breaking out in that tournament, and we ended up breaking down in that tournament. So
I guess that's always how it is. Someone gets the positive, someone gets the negative side. Overall, though, did you sort of feel like that whole trip was quite beneficial? Because you still came back to Australia and you're still one of the best teams here. So surely, at least from a domestic standpoint, that must have been a good thing for your gameplay.
We were extremely excited to be able to get that opportunity and stay there for like almost 2 months, I'm pretty sure. So we were boot camping for so long, like we were kind of losing our minds towards the end of it, but it was 100% necessary to get another Australian team out there. And that's when the overseas community started noticing, like, you know, maybe there is 2 Australian teams that can compete, and, you know, give these guys another chance and see what happens. And I think the major in Cologne was the next one.
Yeah, well, exactly. Speaking of, there wasn't that long between when you came back to Australia and when you went back overseas again. So this is why I say, like, 2015 was a really big year, actually, for Team Immunity. So you come back to ANZ and you play in ACL Sydney 2015. This was the one at Macquarie University, from memory. This is the one where that infamous kind of handshake between Snyper and Sponge happened on the stage. And it's Immunity and Renegades in the grand final. So this is when Vox gets picked up by Renegades. So they have that as well. And what's really interesting about this tournament as well was that it was an international qualifier for the Cologne Asia Minor. So I can remember this tournament. It didn't feel like kind of a big deal at the time, but I think it kind of actually was a pretty big deal to have that kind of international qualifier attached. Like, maybe I wasn't as ingrained yet into the Counter-Strike community and I didn't really understand the implications of a qualifier to the minor. But were you guys putting a lot of effort into this tournament? Did you sort of think of it as a big deal?
Yeah, every tournament that we came into afterwards, we knew that at this point, you know, we have the experience overseas. We're serious. We're taking this 100%. We want to do this full time. And at that point, we still weren't salaried. And actually, we never had a salary in Immunity, so we were always like playing out of just pure passion, and we always wanted to progress to the point where hopefully one day we were able to do it for a living full time. Unfortunately, with Immunity, that didn't happen. But at the same time, at those days, you know, we had, like, luckily all 5 players in the team had good support systems behind them. You know, we have our families taking care of us. You know, some of us are under 18, so we're not exactly working yet. We still have a little bit of time to develop and hopefully get somewhere in the game. So yeah, we had a lot of support, and we were always serious.
Okay, so coming into this event pretty seriously, I think at the time, by the way, just for the context for any of the viewers, there was no salaried teams apart from Renegades. Like, once they got the Renegades deal, I believe was when they were salaried. But even then, it wasn't like a major, sort of massive kind of a salary. It was a big deal because they were the first team to get a salary for NZ. But it wasn't anywhere close to what it is kind of these days. Anyway, so you come second at that event. Again, you know, you're losing to the old Vox/Renegades roster. It seems like, again, that'll continue for a little while. But you do qualify for the Asia Minor. So was it a situation where you were just looking for second place, or were you the kind of team that always wanted to sort of come first, even regardless of whether or not there was 2 slots as a qualifier?
Yeah, we always wanted to come first and beat them no matter what. Like it was always an insane rivalry between us, especially even after Yam left. That even Yam left our team to join them. That made it even more rivalry based for us. We're like, we have to destroy him now. You know, like he's left this team. Let's show him. Let's show him why he should have stayed.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was always like that. But taking the second place is obviously what we were aiming for, and we expected nothing less. So and yeah, that went into the minor, that tournament, wasn't it?
Yes, it did. It did indeed, and that was the minor in Kuala Lumpur from memory. So this was, from what I saw, from the broadcast, quite a like scuffed kind of a minor. It was a little bit all over the place, but what were your sort of expectations going into this one? Because for the most part, the Australian teams at the time were considered, far and away better than the Asian teams. Now that's very vastly sort of shaped a little bit differently as we've gone on through the history of Counter-Strike. But at the time, there wasn't really any super strong Asian team. So it sort of seemed like almost a foregone conclusion, maybe, that Immunity and Renegades should qualify for the major.
Yeah, there was I don't know if Tyloo and Vici were in that tournament. There was
No,
definitely one of them they weren't.
no.
Who was
The
the other?
The other like good team, I guess, was Mongols were there, but this was before Mongols really got super good. Kiyu was the Chinese team that you might be remembering, which had
Yes.
Advent, Orman, and Zoking on it, so most of Vici. And the other team probably to note would be MVP Karnal from Malaysia. So that was like Eamon, Archap, Zeva, and Kaze, which is a pretty okay team as well.
Yeah, we didn't realize how important it would be to actually come top two in the minor. Also, we were slowly starting to understand where this is leading to, but we didn't know exactly how big it was going to be or how it was going to turn out in the future. So we were expected again, yeah, like you said, to get top two, and I don't remember if we lost to Renegades again in that minor, but we did manage to get top two, and that's how we got into the major and got our first signatures and stickers under immunity.
Indeed. Okay, so luckily for you, you didn't actually have to play against Renegades at this minor at all, because it
No.
was two slots to qualify. Instead of having an actual seeding match, you just played the two semi-finals, which you guys were on different sides of the brackets because you both won your group.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You didn't have to play that grand final, so you both just qualified. There was no like seeding match or anything like that. So, I guess you didn't lose this time to
Yeah,
those
nice.
boys.
Better off. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit better. Can you maybe just entertain me for a little bit here? Because, like I said, I remember this event being a little bit scuffed. Was it actually kind of cooked, or was that just what happened across on the broadcast?
I think it was on the broadcast. The event itself, from what I remember, ran pretty smoothly. Like, we didn't have any PC issues from what I remember. Everything was pretty smooth. I think the broadcast was one of the main things that
Hmm.
kind of slowed down everything. So it was actually a good tournament from what I remember. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So a good tournament leads to an even better one, I'm sure, because then you go on to attend the Cologne Major. So, are you sort of having feelings of like, oh, I've made it at this point?
Not so much I've made it because I had no idea what was how important that major actually was at that time. I was still in the mentality of like, you know, s- just play as good as you possibly can in the team environment, be a good teammate, do what you can to get to the next level, and just move on from that. So I think at the end of the day, just making that major with team immunity just boosted everyone's confidence, but at the same time made us realize how big this game is actually going to get.
Hmm. Did you have any like unreasonable expectations at the time going into that event? Because again, you're a sort of plucky team from the ANZ region, but now yes, you've had some okay results. You beat Liquid in the past. You've been the top of Asia, but you're going up against the European teams, some of the best teams, obviously in North America as well. So, what were your thoughts and what were the team's thoughts going into this event?
Yeah, so the team's thoughts, we always had unrealistic expectations, especially me towards my younger stage of my career. I was always like, I'm fucking better than everyone. You know what? I'll smash everyone. I don't give a shit. Like that's how I was, right? Like eventually you learn to become more humble, but I think it's not the worst to go into a tournament like that hoping that you just destroy everyone and being confident. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with being confident, but it it doesn't exactly do anything when you're versing insanely good teams. Um, in a team perspective, so the team mentality behind it was it was overall confident. I think that our expectation going into the major was to minimum make it out of groups, and I think after that whatever happened happened. But that was our expectation going into it. I think that we believed as a team that we could 100% make it out of groups, no issue, which obviously didn't happen. But I think that was an okay expectation to set as a team at that time, anyway.
Okay, how did you prepare for that event? Did you have a boot camp? Because, like, again, I remember at this sort of a time, boot camps were like the shit. You know, nowadays teams don't seem to boot camp quite as much as they did back then, or at least it wasn't as big of a deal. But every single time a team went overseas, it's like, oh, we've got to make the most of this because who knows how many times we're going to go overseas again.
Yeah, I don't exactly remember if we had a boot camp, to be completely honest. I'd like to say we did, but I don't remember. I think we had maybe a week of practice before the tournament actually started in Germany. We had PCs set up somewhere, whether it was in a hotel or something. I think we definitely did play, but it wasn't exactly a like a 2 week to a month like hardcore boot camp. It was like a couple of days of practice into the tournament.
Okay, so in this tournament, you play against Virtus Pro. You lost 16-8, which then put you into the second group stage, and you lost 16-13 to Kinguin. And I think, actually, from what I can see here, that's literally all you played at the major, which seems so unrealistic these days because we know how long majors tend to go for now. But you basically played 2 best of ones, and then you're out of the major. So what did that sort of do to the team psyche?
We were extremely down after that because, like I said, our expectation was to at least maybe win a game or get out of groups or something. But at that point, I think that's when we started going downhill a lot. Like we started questioning, is this team going to be able to push forward? And those are the type of things that you don't need to have in the back of your head as a team. You need to let your organization do the talking, and what happens with them is what happens. Like they decide what happens with the roster. I don't think it should really be left up to a team to go internally and talk to one another about who people should be removing, and that's basically what happened back then.
Okay.
There was a couple of us saying, "Oh, we don't want to play with this guy. We should get somebody else." Blah blah blah, and that's never good. And obviously, that just basically destroyed the whole team.
All right, well, let's just talk very quickly about this result against Kinguin as well. It was a 16-13 loss. You, I don't know if you remember, had actually a pretty good map there. It was 27-16 for you as an individual. So
that was my breakout. That map specifically was the breakout for me.
Okay, so what was people like? Was there a lot of people sort of talking about you as an individual? Like, was it maybe just ANZ people, or was there globally? Did you get any sort of, not necessarily offers or anything like that, but what was the general sentiment around Rickeh after this map then, if you want to break that down a little bit more?
I think that's when the international scene noticed that there is a couple of decent players outside Renegades. Not only me, but other players as well. But they realize, there is other good players coming out of Australia. Even before that, I wasn't. That was where I got noticed internationally. But before that, I was always a consistent top level player in Australia in regards to that. But yeah, that's when I got noticed internationally, 100%.
So did you, I don't know, maybe did you develop like an ego or anything like that after this? Or did you feel like maybe, God, if only my teammates would have fragged a little bit better on that map, right? It's 16-13. I've dropped 27 frags. What more do I have to do?
Yeah, man, to be completely honest, I was a piece of shit back then. Like, I always had an ego. I never really said it out loud to my teammates, but obviously I was upset because I overperformed and majority of my teammates underperformed. So we definitely should have won that map, but I thought that at that point, what I was thinking was eventually just keep doing what you're doing, keep playing your best game, try and be a good teammate, don't fucking rage. Like, because back then, like, not only me, but other people, everybody would have their moments back then. Like, everybody was kind of a little bit immature, to be honest. But me, in general, like, I had a fucking massive ego, so I didn't make it any better. But at the end of the day, I said, keep doing what you're doing, keep playing, and eventually you're probably going to get picked up by Renegades, which, like, it happened. So.
You did eventually get picked up by Renegades, yeah. And we'll get there pretty soon, actually. But before we do that, obviously, we'll close the discussion then on the Cologne Major because you don't go too much further in that one. So you come back to Australia, and, this is another sort of big moment in Australian Counter-Strike history, and normally where I start these interviews from for the majority of, I guess, the kind of new era of pros. Obviously, you've had a whole career prior to this point, but This is the Crown 55K Invitational that I'm talking about. So, you know, you go into this event, and like this obviously must be a pretty big deal for you and for the whole Counter-Strike community in Australia to have this kind of a tournament on our own home shores.
Yeah, Crown was insane, and that was after that. Was that the tournament directly after the major? Was it the next one, or
I'm sure there was probably one or two sort of smaller tournaments that you came back and played that I've sort of skipped over.
that was
But
the important
yeah, this
one?
was the
That's
big
kind of,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened there was actually really interesting. We were in Team Immunity was in discussions with Crown to do some type of sponsorship, and that's when we were looking into actually becoming a salary team under Team Immunity. Unfortunately, they didn't want to work together. So what happened was the players individually contacted Crown to see the possibility of doing a deal with them specifically to be team
Team
Crown.
Crown.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, and that fell through, and we were extremely upset at that point because we performed so well in that tournament. We ended up coming second. We beat Cloud9 and did we beat Chiefs or did we beat Renegades? I don't
I
remember.
think you beat Renegades on day one from memory. Like, if you remember, there was like 2 separate days. There was
Yep.
day one, which was the Australian qualifier. So you got directly invited alongside Renegades to this this first day, which was the Australian qualifier. And then I think you went further on into the tournament based on that particular day, which obviously you guys alongside Renegades won. But yeah, you won 2-0 against Renegades in the ANZ winners match, which is why I guess what it was called. So you took first seed into that day, which is why you ended up facing Cloud9 because presumably they were like second seed behind Virtus Pro. So yeah, it must have been sort of a big deal, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was just like that whole thing, especially even with the Australian crowd, like that was the first taste we got of like a big Australian crowd. You know, like a decent sized crowd. They were cheering not only for Renegades, they were cheering for us also, but and the overseas teams. But obviously, the home ground advantage, I think, had like a bit of a part to play in that also.
And no
But
jet lag and that kind of thing as well, right?
yes, no jet lag, nothing. Like it. I think it definitely made a big difference.
Okay, well, let's talk then specifically about some of the results that you had here. You've already sort of alluded to the 2-0 over Renegades, so I think we can skip over that one. We've sort of talked about the implications of that being that you went on to play against Cloud9 in the semi-final, and that's a game that you actually ended up winning. So this was a really, really big deal. Like, I know people sort of memed a little bit about, you know, Cloud9's career being ended and that kind of thing, but what did you sort of feel like about how you were able to beat Cloud9 here? Because they seemed really sort of... I remember seeing them at this event. They seemed really down after that loss. So this was a massive moment for you, obviously, and a really big moment for Cloud9, but for all the wrong reasons, I suppose.
Yeah, we definitely took into account that they were jet lagged, but regardless of that, we were extremely excited with the win. We didn't really look into it as like, yeah, like they probably felt like shit. Uh, what can I say about that? Really, it was just it was the turning point for us, but in it the way that it happened with Crown, the deal with Crown that fell through, that kind of hurt us a lot. Even though we did so well at that tournament, we saw that we weren't going to be salaried, we weren't going to get any additional support. So and then things kind of fell apart a little bit. So it's weird saying it, right? Because we did so unbelievably well at that tournament, things should be going upwards, but things actually ended up taking 2 steps backwards
Yeah.
because immunities you know they were kind of running out of money. They didn't really want to support us to the point where like we'd have any type of salary, whether it be like $500 a month, like anything, literally anything. We couldn't get anything out of them, and that's when the players started like. Okay, so the most important thing here that I have to say is that we were promised it, and we were promised it for years on end. Like because I was in Team Immunity for like 2, 3
Mm.
years, and from the beginning of that team, all we'd hear, like at least once a month, is you're getting salaries next month, you're getting salaries next month. And that played into us really being unhappy with the organization. And that's why I think things went worse than they should have, at least after that tournament.
Okay, so at what point did this sort of Crown thing fall through? Because from memory, you know, I've obviously spoken to Snyper a lot in the events that we've worked together over the past few years or so, and I seem to recall, at least, you know, I could be wrong, so let me know. But I seem to recall like you were having these discussions, but it wasn't necessarily at this event that you sort of knew things were sort of falling apart. Like I feel like there was a longer period after the 55k Invitational where you were still having these sort of discussions with Crown that you inevitably found out they didn't work. That's why, there might have been still a pretty decent period for a few months after Crown. Like I remember it all sort of fell apart come 2016, but toward the end of 2015 and early 2016, it still seemed to be okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, sorry, it's a little bit hard to remember, but that does sound very familiar. We did have discussions for a while, and I think because the discussions were going on, is why we were still like pretty happy with the things that were happening. But as soon as it fell through, like because the discussions did happen for a couple of months, and basically we asked for a salary. I think we asked for something like $2,000 a month per player, and they didn't want that, and then we got it down to 1,000, and then they just said, nah, you know what, like it's not profitable. I don't think that we want to do it anymore. And Snyper is to thank for that, actually, because he wasn't the one mainly in discussions with Crown at that time. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, it just didn't work.
Okay. So obviously from Crown's perspective, it wasn't a good investment. And as we know, like further on down the track, Crown never really continued with esports. They did do the Crown 55k Invitational for Counter-Strike. They did one for Call of Duty as well. And then they had some sort of involvement in starting Zen League, if you remember what Zen League was, which was that sort of tournament that ESL ran. But after that period, like there wasn't anything to do with Crown anymore. So they must have just decided, no, esports is not where it needs to be yet. I do want to sort of bring things very shortly back to Crown 55k Invitational before we jump on any further, because I think we need to just talk about this grand final against Virtus Pro as well, right? This was a pretty big grand final. You played that first map, which was a 16-14 against Virtus. Sorry, 16-14. It was a 19-17 for Virtus Pro on Overpass, and it sort of felt like right after that map, you guys were like out of the competition, right? Because the next map was a 16-3 on Mirage, where you just got destroyed. So was there any sort of like mental aspect to that first map where once you lost it, you were like, okay, series over, or?
Yeah, in that tournament specifically, there actually wasn't. We were happy with the result of the getting into the overtime. Like as soon as that game finished, we're like, boys, like we're so fucking close to doing this. Like put all your energy into this next fucking game. Everything we got. And then that shit happens, and we're like,
Hindsight,
oh,
right?
all right, it's over. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
But again, I think it was better that we lost 16-4, 16-3 instead of again another 16-14, another overtime. Because if that happened 2 times in a row, I think that would have broke us even worse. So we were still really, really happy going into that game. It was just they were just so much better. Even with their jet lag, they were just fucking better than us.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go on to the next tournament. This is one that you probably won't enjoy talking about quite as much, which is CGPL Season 4. Now, this was the CGPL finals that was at PAX. It was the one with the laptops.
We lost to Chiefs.
This is the one where you lost to Chiefs. So I don't necessarily want to talk too much about the tournament itself, because obviously we all know it was kind of scuffed. I want to talk about more the implications of what happened after that tournament. So if you remember, and I'm trying to remember this correctly as well, there was like this round that needed to be reset, like in overtime or something like that, very close to the end of the map, where you had all bought, you had played part of the round or something like that, and then a pause was called and a match medic had to happen. And then either the money was given to you incorrectly from the admins, or you bought something different, or whatever it may have been. It became a shitstorm. You lost that round anyway. You lost the tournament, obviously, as we know. But there was like these cheating accusations going around and that kind of thing. So we're like 5 years later now, right? So I'm interested to see what is the truth behind that story.
To be completely honest with you, I don't even remember what happened. I know there was a pause. Honestly, I don't even remember who was being accused of buying something incorrectly. I
think it was James was the one that bought something wrong, but there was a lot of accusation at Ian or Snyper, because obviously he was the IGL, so he should be the one tracking the money, quote unquote tracking the money. So he should know how much they were allowed to spend.
Yeah. From what I remember, I think we were complaining towards the end of it because it should have never been left up to the players with that decision. Like, if you match medic, the money should be exactly the same. Everything should be exactly the same. From what I remember, I think he overbought. Like, he bought a couple of extra nades and stuff. But again, I don't remember enough to really get into detail about it. But I definitely know that people weren't happy at that time.
I think what actually ended up happening was like he had a FAMAS. You're on CT side. I think he had a FAMAS in the first round, and then the second time around he had a M4 or something like that. That was the difference.
Oh, was that big of a difference?
I
Oh, what
think
a piece
so.
of shit. Then
Yeah.
I don't even think he said anything. I don't know what the fuck happened there, but if that was the difference, then we deserved to be flamed if if you did that. So
I might be remembering wrong. It could be just some grenades, but something tells me that it was a FAMAS for an M4 or something like that.
yeah,
Anyway,
no good. Yeah.
doesn't seem like it was that big of a thing for you guys. Obviously, it was a big thing for the community. Everyone was talking shit about immunity again. So, it just seems like it goes from one thing to another where it's like immunity's on a high and then something bad happens and everyone's like, fuck immunity. And then you do something good again and everyone's like, wow, immunity's really good. Anyway, this is getting to that situation now that you were talking about where Team Immunity was having a pretty rough time. So that was the last event in 2015. A really standout year for Team Immunity and probably, the peak of Team Immunity, I would say. Then we roll into 2016, which is where things start to go wrong for Team Immunity if they haven't already started to go wrong towards the end of 2015. And one of the first examples of that, I think, is the IEM Taipei Minor Qualifier, which is a qualifier that you ended up losing 2-1 to the Chiefs, which is obviously a team that went on to be a very, very good team. But at the time, Team Immunity was a top team. And it really starts to seem like now you've lost to Chiefs at CGPL Season 4, which was one iteration of Chiefs, by the way. This 2016 iteration of Chiefs was a different Chiefs. But it seems like your influence as a top team starts to kind of fade really a little bit starting in 2016.
Yeah, we started. Yeah, like you said, we started losing to Chiefs, and that's when everybody was like, boys, what's going on here? Like we can't." But at the same time, all the other teams in Australia, they were striving to beat us because Renegades had gone overseas. So sooner or later, we were definitely going to be dethroned, and that's just the way it goes, Like eventually, you start losing like more consistently to teams that you shouldn't have been losing to a couple of months ago. So I think it was kind of inevitable, and you know, people just took it in a way as we're just on a downward spiral now. So things kind of need to change.
Okay, this was the last event that you played with a Core 5 from 2015. So things did go on to change. Was there anything to do with that? Was some of the results here to do with the fact that either you knew Ustilo was leaving or there was just a bad sort of sentiment within the team at the time?
Yeah, we didn't know Ustilo was leaving. I think at that time, Renegades were deciding between me and Ustilo, and they went with Ustilo because obviously Yam was already orbing for the team, and I was kind of upset because again, like I said back then, I had a fucking ego, dude, and I'm like, surely I'm next in Renegades, surely fucking they're gonna pick me up, like I'm playing so well, etc. This and that, and they got Carlo, and I'm like, no, like I'm never gonna join this fucking team, man. Like, do they not like me? Like, I understand if they probably not like me because I'm kind of a piece of shit. I was a piece of shit back then.
Mm.
So I was really upset. And when Ustilo left, oh man, there's this whole part of immunity with like Moey, Zewsy, and Ofnu and all that just came back to my head. Like we played, yeah.
We'll get
We
into
ended up,
it.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. So when Ustilo left, that's when we decided to like kind of uh, overhaul the team a little bit, and um, Tony Sentinel kind of left it up to us to pick up some up and coming players in Australia, and that's I think when we got like, I think that's when we had the talk, and we ended up removing Snyper,
Mhm.
and James transitioned into in-game leader, and then we got um,
You got Zewsy and Moey. Yeah.
Zewsy and Moey.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so before we get too far into that discussion, I do want to ask one thing, which is maybe relevant, obviously, to all these roster changes. But given that, it seems like immunity is on a bit of a downward trend, and did it sort of ever dawn on you that, like, maybe you wanted to move away from Team Immunity? Because, like, I guess there is that argument that you probably want to stay with Immunity, which is why you ended up making these changes. But did you ever think about moving to some other team or anything like that?
So with me, at that point in my life, I wasn't like, obviously I had support, but at the same time I was working full time, and the deals that kept falling through with Team Immunity, like promising a salary, or the deals falling through with Crown, and knowing that we weren't ever going to get a salary with this team, um, it kind of mentally affected me in the way that maybe I'm going to have to do something else, because I was also working like part time as a security guard, and I think at that stage of my life, I was I was just contemplating whether I should continue or not.
Mm.
And I basically said, if I don't get into Renegades within the next 6 months, like we have to just move on with this shit because it's never going to happen. So yeah, that's basically what happened with me. My mentality was I need to get into Renegades, otherwise I'm not going to be able to support myself and be able to do this at all, because it was getting to the point where, again, I was living at home, and my parents were like, you know, you're not working enough. You're wasting your time on this, etc. But we're going to give you another year. Like, have another year. Work part time if you want. Do your security as long as you're making your money, paying rent, etc. Whatever. But we're going to give you another year to do this, and after that, you like we're not going to support you anymore.
Mm.
And thank fuck that year, like I got into Renegades, so it
Yeah.
worked out.
I had a very similar sort of a situation. It wasn't kind of like, oh, you have a year. It was kind of like, Jordan, you need to do something. And then,
Yeah.
a couple of months later, I got the offer from ESL to work full time here in Sydney. So similar sort of a situation.
It's funny how it works out
yeah.
sometimes, isn't it?
Either way,
Crazy.
I do want to sort of get into some of these roster changes a little bit more in depth. Now, the first one, obviously, the big one is Snyper, quote unquote, retiring. Now, you've already said there that you sort of decided as a team to remove Snyper. So, I don't know. I want to know what the situation is. Like, I've obviously heard this from Snyper's perspective, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective and any of your other teammates when I inevitably maybe do an interview with them. But what was the whole sort of mindset around removing Snyper? Because I remember at the time he went on to a quote-unquote coach role, but it seemed like he didn't do anything as the coach. Like, that was really just a title that he had held to kind of keep up some semblance of involvement maybe with the team.
Yeah, once we approached him, like, oh man, it was a really, really bad conversation. He wasn't happy at all. Like, and obviously I understand, like, things he saw things as everything is pretty much okay. Like, we're moving forward slowly, slowly, things will get better. But our mentality back then was, excuse me, that it was kind of based on mechanical skill more than IGLing. Like, we saw that James had the IGL potential, and he was just overall, in our opinion, a better player than Sniper. I don't think the move was really warranted. Like, I think that if we stuck together, we probably would have done better with Sniper instead of picking up a couple of new players. But that's hindsight's a bitch,
Mm.
But I think he kind of took it to heart a little bit, like a lot. He took it to heart a lot. But at the end of the day, like, I'm still friends with him to this day. There is probably maybe one person that he's not too happy with from the team back
I wonder
then,
who
but
that is.
yeah, you know who that is,
Of course.
But so it was just like kind of internal issues, But
Yeah.
yeah, it was because of that. What happened internally, it was because it made it 3 times worse because we decided to side with one person instead of him,
Okay.
So
So it was mostly down to the fact that you felt that James could take over as IGL and that in the game, mechanically speaking, Ian wasn't at the same level maybe as some of the other players that you could have picked up. Is that part of the reason?
yeah, that was our idea going behind it, basically. Yep.
Okay. All right. So then he sort of gets removed from the team. What was your sort of take on the whole fact that he was still involved with team immunity at the time? Like, was it just a title? Like, he didn't. From memory, don't think he ever ended up actually doing any coaching or anything like that for you guys. And it seemed like there was like this whole breakdown between the teams. So I'm not sure that you would have wanted him as a coach at that time anyway.
Yeah, I think again, I don't remember if he definitely didn't transition into coaching at that point. I think Team Immunity put him as that to like ease the pain of actually being removed from the team. Like, he went into like management or something like that, but it was only very, very briefly. And I don't know what he was doing in terms of like with team immunity, like helping out, but he wasn't coaching us like that 100%.
Okay.
There was definitely a bit of bad blood after all that happened. So yeah, I don't think he didn't do anything with us after that.
Definitely. All right. Well, then let's talk about Zewsy and Moey being picked up. Obviously, they're kind of two different players, at least from a storyline perspective, right? Moey's been around since day dot. He's like a dinosaur at this point. He's a known quantity. Whereas Zewsy's a bit more of a newer player, coming through Global Offensive. And at the time, I remember Zewsy being like this up and comer. Everyone was talking about him being like this super sick guy. And I think actually the community sentiment to these changes to Team Immunity was actually quite positive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the thought process behind Zewsy and Moey, and how did you sort of expect it to go with Team Immunity?
Yeah, back then we basically looked at the best players, not only statistically, but also players who had a good mentality coming into games that we knew that we'd be able to work with. And yeah, Zewsy and Moey, like we were already good friends with Moey, and we knew how much damage he could actually cause in a team. So sorry, in a good way, obviously, like how much firepower he can bring in a team. And yeah, Zewsy was just like a super chill, outgoing guy that everybody was talking about at that current time. Everyone's like, Zewsy is this best player to come out of New Zealand, going to be destroying everyone in a couple of months, and we decided to take the chance on him as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's where that came from.
There's been kind of a few players that have like been that guy. Like I remember prior to that, it was like Dizzy when he was playing in Vox at the time. Everyone's like, this guy's gonna be fucking sick. And you know, some of them have made it, some of them haven't made it. Obviously, Liaz was another one. Obviously, has gone on to go to the Renegades and 100 Thieves roster, so he definitely made it. Anyway, that's totally tangent. Let's jump forward a little bit in history. Once you've made these roster changes, now you're going to go into another Asia Minor, right? We see the Asia Minors cropping up a lot in your history, so continuing to be at the top of ANZ at the very least. So this is the first one where Team Immunity kind of misses out, and this is kind of the rise of Tyloo, right? I remember in that Kuala Lumpur minor that we talked about, you sort of asked, was Tyloo at that event? They weren't at that event, but Tyloo and Vici were at this event, and this is the one where Tyloo actually came first place over Renegades. So you guys actually ended up coming fourth behind Vici there as well. So was this just the case that like, okay, it's a new team, maybe you haven't had enough time to mesh together, or were the Chinese teams legitimately starting to get good?
The Chinese teams were definitely getting better. I just think, like I said before, if we didn't remove Snyper and we kept that lineup, we didn't start making a whole bunch of changes, we probably would have beat the teams. And maybe oh yeah, Tyloo was better than Renegades at that point. You're correct. So I think we might have had a better. I think we would have had a better placing, 100%. It was the experience coming into that tournament. As a team, we just weren't prepared enough, 100%.
Okay, fair enough. It wasn't I guess, a big deal. It was a bit of a blip in the radar of your career because, nowadays, like losing an Asian Minor doesn't seem like that big of a deal. You've gone on and done much better things in your history. But I guess at the time, it must have been a pretty big deal for you. And it seems like now, like that particular period is where AU starts to falter a little bit and fall behind. And Asia starts to sort of really rise up and become a bit more of a powerhouse in this sort of like, I know I say Asia and ANZ as two different regions, but by and large, they are one region, right? Your whole qualification process goes through Asia. And it seems like the Asian teams at this point start to become the top teams in Asia, as like weird as that is to kind of say.
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, like the whole region is kind of put into one in that retrospect. It's just sorry, sorry, I missed the question. Sorry.
Basically, what I'm saying is, like, was this the time where Asian teams started to get better than ANZ? Because prior to this, ANZ was considered the best teams in Asia, but now it doesn't seem like it anymore.
Yeah, that's when everybody was saying, Tyloo are probably going to just outclass the Australian scene completely almost every time because of the players. Like everybody had this thing with, especially the Tyloo players, like Attacker and like crazy guys like that with their sensitivity and their flicks and their movement. It just looked like they were so unbelievably switched on, where everybody thought, these guys are going to be insane. They're going to be the best in the fucking world. Like, look how they're playing. Look at their flicks. Look at their aim. But I don't think anybody realized that that's not what helps you win games entirely in CS:GO. Yeah. It's more about trades. Like yeah, mechanics is definitely there, but if you trade correctly, you're not going to be able to, it's not all about skill, basically.
And it's now fair to say that the ANZ teams have kind of caught back up and even maybe overtaken at least the peak of the Asian teams with like the likes of 100 Thieves and even current Renegades, maybe arguably, depending on where you sort of see them in comparison to the likes of Tyloo and Vici. Either way, that's a discussion for, another day, I suppose. We do move on to a pretty interesting period in your career now, though, because this will be the last event that you played with Team Immunity, WCA 2016, the SEA Qualifier. Now, this was one that was in Beijing. I don't know if you guys went to Beijing for this. I think you did, or if you played it from somewhere like Perth. But you do qualify in first place, and this was, like I said, this was your last event. So at this point, do you know like that you're leaving to go to Renegades? Have you had that conversation yet?
No, not yet. It was after that tournament. We actually ended up winning that tournament
Hmm.
in Beijing. I'm pretty sure we
Yep.
beat. It was a best of 5 against Mongols or
MVP Carnal came
MVP,
second.
MVP Kano. Yep,
Mm.
that's the team. We played a best of 5 against them. There was no Tyloo wasn't in that tournament from what I remember, but they were there, and we ended up playing a show match against them afterwards.
Yep.
And even though we won that tournament, um, like that show match kind of fucking killed us. Like we were like, all right, let's prove to everybody that we're actually so much better than Tyloo right now. We got fucking destroyed, and we had a big argument after that. And like there was no reason to because it was just a fucking show match. But that yeah, that kind of destroyed the team internally. I don't remember exactly what happened. I think it had to do with me being kind of a piece of shit again. Like from what I remember, I was just really upset at how like because we all said as a team like we're going to give it 100% our best, and I just feel like nobody really played like how we played in the tournament at all. And I think that was just because it's just nerves. Like it's just nerves and experience. And again, Tyloo were just 100% a better team than us at that point. And I kind of brought it up like um, why were we playing like this, blah blah blah, etc. And it all blew out of proportion. And yeah, that's what happened after that tournament. Even though we won the actual tournament, the show match with Tyloo was the fucking killer for some reason.
All right. Well, luckily it becomes not your problem anymore because you very shortly after go on to join Renegades. So finally, you've kind of made it to this position where you've been really looking for it, you've been grinding for it, and you've gone through sort of hell and back with Team Immunity. I always sort of feel like Team Immunity is maybe one of the tragedies of ANZ Counter Strike. Like I know that's a pretty like drama-esque kind of way of sort of talking about it, but it was one of
Say
those
that though,
teams that
yeah.
could have really made it, and it just never seemed to kind of work, unfortunately. So you've made it out of the trenches, essentially. So let's talk about how you joined Renegades and how this sort of all came about. I want to know kind of like who reached out to you. Sort of who was the one that messaged you, and how did you find out about Renegades potentially looking to pick you up?
So I think it was Gomez that messaged me. Shout out to that guy, by the way. Like he's done so much for this community. It's actually insane. He reached out to me and said basically, look, we're looking to make a replacement. We want to get you trialing. I think I trialed a couple of games with them while they were in Australia. From what I remember, I'm pretty sure it was that because I do remember playing with them a couple games before I actually moved over. So we scrimmed for like about a week. They were happy with my performance, the role I took within the team as the main AWPer, and then basically they said, "Look, we're going to move you straight away. Are you ready to go?" And I'm like, "Yep, all right, sweet." And that like it basically happened as quick as that. I didn't know. I don't remember if I knew they were exactly replacing Sponge. I didn't know who they were replacing. They didn't tell. Actually, no, that doesn't make any sense because I was scrimming with them without Sponge. So
Hmm.
yeah, all right. I knew they were replacing Sponge, and yeah, it only took about a week of scrims, and then they said, "Yep, we're happy. Let's move you in."
Okay, on the Sponge point, did that worry you at all? Obviously, because he's the IGL and the fact that he's departing, did you sort of see that there could be a good IGL figure in the team? Because, you know, quite famously in the history of Counter-Strike, we've seen a lot of teams, their IGL has departed and the team has sort of just fallen apart. You know, even Immunity, for example, is one pretty good example of that. So what
Yeah.
did you think about that? You know, I assume at that time, Azza was still starting his sort of career as an IGL, so what did you think of Azza early on in the piece as an IGL and the prospects of the team without Sponge?
Actually, what happened was is that Yam was becoming the IGL for that. Yam was our
Right.
in-game leader until um, as I started becoming an in-game leader after I was gone from
Yeah,
Renegades.
actually, I think I remember that now,
So
yeah.
yeah, so basically, I was so ecstatic about joining Renegades. I didn't care who the fuck I was replacing. I didn't care what was going on. I'm like, all right,
Right.
we're in this team. We're just fucking playing the game, and that's it. Like, so I wasn't thinking about that specifically, but in to answer that question in more depth now that I'm thinking about it is, um, I had played with Yam in Team Immunity in 1.6 and in CS:GO, and I knew that he had insane IGL potential, and I knew that he was mechanically better than Sponge as well. So coming into that team, I was happy to be um, under Yam as under his leading style.
Okay, so then the other thing is obviously the fact that, you know, Immunity at this point, seems to have like gone on and joined Renegades, right? We've already talked about the fact that Immunity was like this feeder team for Renegades, but now with your addition, Renegade starts to look more like Immunity than the old Vox lineup, you know, because again, like
Me, Ustilo, Yam.
you've got Yam, Ustilo, and yourself. So was there ever that sort of sentiment that like, oh, you know what, we are actually still kind of Immunity, but we're here in Renegades?
We never thought of it as that, but we kind of realized we're like, hold on a second, all three of us got poached. So
Yeah.
obviously, like, if we stuck together as a team, especially if Yam stayed with us, we would have started beating Renegades consistently.
Hmm.
But again, Yam knew that we were better than them at the time, and whether he admitted that to us, whether he actually believed it or said it to make us feel better, because at that time we had beaten when he joined Renegades, we had beaten them in the nationals in the tournament right before he left.
Yep.
So we're like, well, so why are you leaving, etc. And he's like, look, man, like they're just a better organization. They can support us better, and we have a salary. How can you say no to that? And that's just the way it is. They were attending international tournaments. Like, what would you rather do? Stay at home, make no money, and like eventually have to start like a job in a different industry, or would you rather transition into the next step of your career? So that was 100% fair enough on
Yep.
his part.
Okay, the final question then for the joining Renegades discussion was, why were you picked up over anyone else? You know, do you think that there was anyone else maybe that they would have thought about or discussed, or were you literally the only option at the time?
I think they were discussing to pick up a couple other players. I don't remember exactly who. I think they were talking about Zewsy also. There was a couple of other people in the picture. I don't exactly remember who I was competing against. I think it was Ofnu or Zewsy or one of those guys, but they were really looking for a main AWPer at the time because Yam was happy to transition into a secondary AWP role because I don't think he wanted to pick it up all the time, but he wanted to be able to AWP, kind of like what I'm doing now in these teams. Like
Yep.
you can pick up the AWP kind of whenever you want, and you can be that hybrid style kind of lurky player, and he enjoyed playing that style on top of in-game leading because he just felt like a nice balance. So I think at the end of the day they realized like, yeah, Yam's happy to do that, so let's just pick up like a full main AWPer, and I think that's why I got the part over the other guys.
Okay, so we jump into your career in Renegades then, and it starts off with E-League Season 1, which is, I think, a pretty big step up for someone like you, even despite the fact that you've played quite a few international tournaments. So how did you sort of feel like you were integrating into the team? Did you mesh well? Did you go into this tournament no pressure or anything like that? Or was it like a really sort of big thing mentally wise?
Back then, mentally wise, it was a little bit of pressure, definitely. I I think it probably held my performance back a little bit because of the way I approached those games initially. But what really helped was the first game of that E-League tournament with Renegades. We beat Flipside like 16-5 or something like that. And that completely alleviated any pressure I had on me, even though we lost some important games afterwards. After that game specifically, I realized I'm like, there's no need to panic or anything. Like, you're in this team, just play your fucking game, be a good teammate, and everything will come as it happens, you know? So yeah, because we beat Flipside, it alleviated a lot of pressure off me, like in the sorry, not the breakout games, the what's
The
it called?
first couple of games that you played, sort of thing. Mm.
First games with Renegades, yeah.
Okay, so E-League Season 1, it doesn't go amazingly. You know, you guys go 3-5 in the group, so it's okay, but it's nothing amazing. We'll jump forward then to Extremesland 2016, and I don't remember if you played any Extremeslands after this, but this is obviously a sort of domestic China tournament that, you know, has all the best teams in Asia mostly and ANZ coming to it. So for you guys, obviously, as Renegades, being a team that competes in North America and that kind of thing, the expectation is that you should actually just come in here and basically shit stomp everyone.
Yeah.
So,
That's when we lost to Vici, wasn't it?
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so you won the group. You won Group C pretty easily. You had NXL, eHome, and Rascal Jester in that. So, look, if I asked you to name the players that are on most of those teams, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me, which I think is a good indication of the caliber of most of the teams there. So, yeah, you get through the group, but it's not really a big deal at all. What we really want to talk about then is the playoffs. So you make it through the playoffs all the way to the grand final. 2-0 against Made in Thailand, 2-0 against Mongols. But it's this result against Vici that you've already spoken about that seemed to raise alarm bells a little bit. You dropped 2-1 to them in the grand final. And does this, you know, sort of weigh on the minds a little bit of the Renegades roster at the time?
Yeah, there was definitely there's just one thing with that Renegades roster that I was in. Like, we were so inexperienced in how to deal with emotions after losses, where the team environment after a loss like that was just really, really, really bad, and it's hard to break out of it. Like you need to give everybody their space, you need to give everybody time. Like, yeah, I think not only us, but a lot of teams back then, we just didn't know how to handle our emotions and didn't know how to handle losses properly. And I think that's what made things like worse after going into like games where we should win and we lose. And not only that, not games even though that we should win, but just games that we lose in general. We just didn't know how to handle it properly. And yeah, losing to Vici was pretty fucking bad at that point. Like, yes, they had the home crowd advantage. Yes, they played better on the day, but there's no way we should have lost to them in that tournament. And I remember Yam tweeting after that, like, what's the point of playing if all we do is come second? And I was fucking pissed at that tweet, dude. I was like, why? What the fuck is this guy on about? Like, but I kind of understand why he said that now because like the guy was just so unbelievably passionate about the game, and it makes sense. And there was no need for me to be like, you know, does that mean like he just doesn't care anymore, or like like I said, we didn't know how to handle our emotions, and obviously it showed.
Yeah, definitely. So not a great loss. Again, like in the context of like your history as a player and the history of Renegades as a team, like you don't even really think about this result at all. So I think probably it affected you maybe a little bit more than it really should have. Either way, we'll jump forward to ESL Pro League Season 4, and this is where you guys actually have, at least as far as I'm concerned, a really good result. You came 5th in the season overall. So I mean, I don't think that you guys could have really expected much more. Like Cloud9 at the time, obviously very good, outplaced you. Immortals, SK, and Optic, and all these teams at the time were really, really good teams. You did better than NRG and Team Liquid, so I think you have to probably be pretty happy with the result here, despite the fact, as you would remember, you don't actually go on to play in the season finals, even despite qualifying for it, because this was the season that clashed with the Asia
It was a
Minor.
clash. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the shit thing for us. Like we were kind of upset about that, but again, like going into that, even though we had such a good placing, like the matches that we lost online and the stuff that we would lose, again, we didn't know how to handle it properly, and that's what kind of fucked us like internally. We just um there was no like psychologist back then, there wasn't any like stuff that there wasn't any sources externally that could help individuals deal with specific losses that were maybe a little bit more important than other games. And yes, we were 100% happy with the result, but then yeah, once we realized we have to go to the minor instead of it as well, like yeah, that was pretty bad.
Was it like a bit of a tilter for the team environment? Were you in a bit of a negative headspace maybe because of that?
Yeah, I think we definitely were, but at the same time, we knew we basically have no choice. We have to go to the minor. We're not going to miss out on major. We're not going to miss out on stickers, signatures, and all that cool stuff.
Okay.
And the major is the most important tournament of the year, every year for the most part. And it's yeah, so we quickly decided yes, we're going to skip EPL. At least people know that that was our. I don't know if it was Renegades' second season in EPL or third or something, but that was my first season in
Hmm.
EPL overseas, and we qualified for the finals. So we were still happy, but like happy and upset at the same time. It's kind of hard to say. You know what I
Definitely.
mean?
So obviously you dodged it to go to the minor, which we'll have a brief discussion about here, where you go to this minor, you are in the same group as Vici. This time you manage to get through the group unscathed. You win 21-19 over Vici, so a very, very close result. And at the time, this was actually that Vici Cyberzen team, so it was like an amalgamation of a couple of teams, but doesn't really matter too much. You beat them, you go through as the first seed from Group B, which means you're on the other side of the bracket to Tyloo, so that's good news as well. And you beat MVP early on in the bracket. No big deal, really. Vici actually, interestingly, beats Tyloo. So you don't have to play Tyloo in the upper bracket final, and you go all the way through to the grand final. No problems at all. So you immediately qualify for the major, but you don't qualify in first place. Now, this is the sticking point again, and this is where it really seems like the rivalry between Tyloo and Renegades of this era starts to kind of
Yeah.
build. Because this is the second minor now that Renegades have actually lost to Tyloo in the grand final. Obviously, the first one that you've played in. But it's 2 times now for Renegades that they've lost to Tyloo. So what is, I guess, what do you think of this? What does the team more so think of this? Because obviously this is probably a bigger deal for them now, having lost twice in a row in the minor.
Yeah, so I think it was again like after losses like that, everybody just needs like a day to cool off. Whereas it's different nowadays. you know, depending on your mentality as a player and your experience, you can brush off things like that a lot easier. But yeah, back then, like everyone was just so upset, and we had higher expectations of ourselves. And I think passion is a good thing, but if you're so passionate to the point where it gets you depressed for like a couple days afterwards because of something crazy, like it's not exactly healthy. And I think we were too I don't know, like to say passionate, too passionate to the point where it was detrimental to us. I think that's kind of fair to say. It's just, yeah, it kind of ruined us a little bit because of our extremely high expectations, not only as individuals but as a team.
I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that you should have been able to beat Tyloo at the time, given
Yeah,
the emphasis that probably would have been put on this team, not only from the ANZ contingent, but also obviously from Renegades as an organization, being able to put
yeah,
all of those resources toward you. So it was probably a bit of a surprise, I think, for most people to see you lose to Tyloo there. But either way, you still qualify for the major, so it's not like you dodged Pro League finals for no reason. You still get through to the major, and it doesn't really matter too much. The sticking point being, though, that when you do go to the major, you go out 0-3 in this. Well, it was really the major qualifier, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say the major. You go 0-3. So you play against NIP, CLG, and Cloud9, and
oh, the
it's a
CLG
0-3.
game.
So
No, all right, yeah. Sorry, go. Yeah.
no, I mean, I want you to go now after that reaction. So break it down for me. What
Ah,
happened here?
okay. So yes, we went 0-3. We didn't have a chance against Cloud9 because uh, okay. So I'll begin. Who was so
NIP was the
CLG
first one.
Cloud9, NIP. We lost like 16-9 or something.
Hmm.
Um, going to the CLG game, we're gonna fucking smash these kids, right? And we basically did. Like we were up 15-6, 15-7, something like that on T side. And I'll never forget to this day, like we all bought auto snipers and started spamming the mid doors at like 15-7, and we lost that round. Um, we had one more gun round after that. We lost that, and then we got into eco rounds. We had to eco twice. They got it up to 15-15, and then we fucking lost in overtime. And like I said back then, our mentality with losses wasn't so wasn't so good as a team. That just destroyed everyone. Absolutely fucking destroyed everyone to the point where it was like, oh my god, I hate my life. Like, how has this happened to us? Why did we do this to ourselves? Like, it was just so unbelievably embarrassing that happened, and that destroyed us inside for quite some time.
So what was the intention behind this auto sniper buy? Like, was it like, because obviously you're up 15 and whatever, you have a lot of money, I assume. So was it like, oh,
Yeah,
let's just BM these guys? Or was it
yeah.
like, oh, we actually want to get a pick?
It was just straight out BM. We're just like, all right, we're fucking, it's over. It's 15-7, just fucking 15-6 or something. Just finish them, and yeah, it fucked us completely. You're only supposed to buy like, auto snipers when it's like the last round of the game, not when there's so many rounds left and it could actually fuck your economy and enable them to have a comeback. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what we did. We did it at the exact we did it the wrong way around, basically,
Hmm.
and it cost us. And then after that, we were so upset that like going into that Cloud9 game, I think we were just straight up like dead in the
Your
mind
mental
for that
boomed,
game.
so to
Yeah,
speak. Okay, so you go 0-3. Obviously, the impact on the team is probably quite negative after this major, because I assume you would have had high hopes now that, you've been in this roster for a little while. Seems like things are starting maybe to click after what you were able to do in ESL Pro League Season 4. Obviously falls apart at the major. Now, do you think, because very quickly after this was when you left Renegades, and I don't necessarily want to speak for you, but I think the circumstances were that you were removed from Renegades. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But do you
yeah,
think that the team was at that time starting to think, you know what, we probably need to make a change?
yeah. I can go into a bit of detail about that. Actually, what happened was it was more so internal issues between me and the coach that I don't really want to go into too much detail about. But the reason I was removed was because um, the issues the arguments that I had with Kassad when he joined. When PK was in the team coaching us, like everything was good. Like, don't get me wrong, the mentality was pretty bad after that major qualifier, to the point where you'd have to have somebody saying in Messenger, boys, like if we don't come out of this, we're not going to be able to beat Cloud9 tomorrow. No matter, like, regardless of what happened, we have to put it past us, etc. But like, it didn't help at that point. yeah, the stuff with me and Renegades was because I had a huge argument with Kassad in terms of like just how can I say it without coming across as a fuckwit? Basically, what happened was that he had a certain style of leading a team, Kassad, that when he came into the team, he was extremely over emotional to the point where, like, we're practicing and he's slamming desks and shit. And I was kind of the only one who spoke up about this type of stuff. And I said, look, bro, like, you can't do that. Like, and yeah, he understood that. He said stuff, but there was also other things where I would always like to give input after games about what I think we can do better, how we can improve. But at the same time, I didn't choose my words very wisely. Um, there was a lot of things that I probably said that not only annoyed him but annoyed other people as well. Like I think um, a big thing had to do with like mechanical skills and stuff like that, saying like, are we actually good enough? Like, how can we get better? Like, how can we just be sharper? How can we play better as a team, trade better? And I was always throwing out suggestions at the wrong time, and he didn't like that. He was like, Rick, just let me handle it, let me deal with it. Like, you don't have to do this, blah blah blah. I'm like, but in a team environment, I like to everybody should be able to have an input, and the way I see a coach should come into the team not only just to take over the team and implement his whole style, but should also ask what the players need from him in order to help
Mm.
them become better players. And anyway, at the end of the day, it was just a fucking shit show. And right, like now, to this day, like I'm friends with Kassad. Like we've put all that stuff behind us. But at that specific time, again, like we all said a lot of things to each other that pushed it to the point where it was so far gone that I was like, I don't want to fucking play with this team anymore. Like everybody's siding with Kassad. He's just joined this team. Like I'm only trying to get a word out there. But again, like I said some things that were really really bad, and after that we couldn't go back because I already said I said I don't want to play. I don't want to play anymore if this guy's here. Blah blah blah, etc. And it was just a whole bunch of internal issues, and that's why. And it kind of fucks me till this day because they said, Rick, like we do want you to opt for us. Like if you want to stay, we want you to play with us, but you're gonna have to sort this out.
Mm.
And it was so emotionally like gone at that point where I was just like, nah, fuck it. Like I can't do it. And that's when I got benched.
Yeah.
And that's basically what happened.
So a bit of a like maybe a stylistic difference, I guess, between you and Kassad in what you wanted from the team or what your expectations maybe were from that relationship should be. Is
Yeah.
I guess what the inevitable issue then was for you. But you, I mean, it almost seems like you, in a way, decided that you didn't want to be on this team, but you were also kind of removed from the team as a result of that. So it's like a bit of a weird sort of a situation. Anyway, I want to quickly touch on your last event with Renegades, which was Dreamhack Masters Las Vegas Qualifier in 2017. Now, I don't know if this was like after you already knew that you were kind of donezo with the team, or if this was before you knew that you were donezo with the team, but you sort of seem to have a pretty decent result here. I think you qualified for the
Which one
DreamHack
was it?
event.
Dreamhack Vegas?
Hmm.
Yeah, that was the last one we qualified for. Yeah.
So you obviously helped them qualify for an event that you wouldn't inevitably go on to play at. But did you know that at that time that you were leaving, or were you still, as far as you were concerned, going to be on that team?
No, the real kind of arguments happened after that tournament.
Okay.
It all spiraled out of control within a couple of days because of specific practice results. And yeah, like I said, like me and Kassad were both extremely passionate people at the time, and we had a very different way of going about things, and it just did not like. And I hate like nobody else in the team would really kind of speak their mind. I was a very outspoken person. I'd always have, and it worked against me in a lot of times where I'd always have something, whether it be constructive or whether it be stupid. Like I'd always have something to say back then,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of the times like I'd just say stupid shit, and Kassad wouldn't like it, and that's basically the way it went down. But after the DreamHack Las Vegas qualifiers is when all that stuff sort of happened.
Yeah, it's a little bit interesting, right? When you talk about team environments, there always seems to be a few sort of passive players, and then there seems to be the guys that always want to have an input on the team. And sometimes
Yep.
you run into issues when there's too many people that maybe want to have that kind of input because you end up inevitably clashing on things. So do you think it was maybe a situation like that where there was just one too many cooks or something like that?
there needs to be a balance. Like I was saying before, I think there needs to be a balance in like listening and accepting what people have to say, and also trying to help um, build better players as a coach. But again, like it depends what organization you're playing for. It depends who comes in as a coach. Like
Mm.
if an organization brings in a coach and that organization says, "Look, he's in control of the team. He's going to build you guys up. He's going to tell you guys what to do." You listen to him 100%. If they say that, you need to do that. And um, that wasn't exactly said from Renegades, but Kassad came in with that mentality,
Mhm.
and that's how it was. And like, and yeah, I was the only one who kind of went against his coaching style, and yeah, it did not work out for me very well.
Definitely seems like I've never met the guy personally. Like I've never spoken to him, but it definitely seems like something that has continued in his career as a coach. Like I feel like from the interviews that I've seen and the discussions that I've seen surrounding him, he definitely likes to be a coach that is in control
He's a
of
tough
his.
guy, man.
Hmm.
He's a tough guy, but yeah, like don't get me like he's a really good guy. Like we did get along. It's just we got along outside of the game. It was just purely Counter Strike stuff.
Yeah.
Like it was just different mentalities at that specific time.
Okay, let me ask you this then, and this will be the last thing about Renegades before we start talking about CLG. What would and the question would be like, I know this might be quite difficult to answer, but do you think it would have been better for your career had you inevitably stayed with Renegades, or do you think what ended up happening afterwards with CLG and Rogue and whatever was that more beneficial in the long term?
I think it could have gone both ways. Obviously, where it's led to now, I'm extremely happy where I am now. I wouldn't have like if I didn't get benched on Renegades and transition into all these other teams and stuff, I wouldn't be married right now. I wouldn't be where I am right now. So I think like I don't really like to say everything happens for a reason, etc. Blah blah blah. But put it this way, I wouldn't be where I am now. I think it would have been better for my career if I stayed with Renegades. That I agree with, and I will regret that to this day. But what I don't regret is the things that happened because of me being benched on Renegades.
Sure.
So it's a two-way street. It's so hard for me to like yeah, I think yeah, career wise it would have been better if I stayed on Renegades. And they said to me, Rick, like even though all this shit's gone down, like we do want you to play, but and I was just such a fucking idiot, and I said I fuck it, and it's funny because the day afterwards, like everybody took a day off and everything calmed down, and then I kind of came back and I'm like, all right, let's try and give it another chance. And then the roles swapped over
It
from
was a
me
bit too
being
late.
like, yeah, from me being like, fuck it, I don't want to play. Then everyone else is like, fuck it, we don't want to play with you. So yeah, it's just a shit show.